These days, the video game industry is so full of clones, imitators and trend bandwagons that finding uniqueness and individualism is a very rare occurrence. Such sameness shouldn't be possible in an art form that has what is essentially endless possibilities in creativity. And yet here we are in 2019, where nearly every game we come across is either the same as 20 others, or at the very least borrows so many elements from another that it's hard to distinguish an individual identity that differentiates it from that of which it borrows from. But every once in a while a game comes along that is truly unique. A game that is so different from that of anything else that it can't even be compared. A game that is an absolute one in a million. And the game we're looking at today is one such game. Anodyne 2 Return to Dust is an action-adventure game and the sequel to the 2013 Anodyne. It is developed and published by indie developers Tani and Marina Kittaka of Analgesic Productions, and released August 12, 2019. Anodyne 2 takes everything that was loved about the original game and brings it to a whole new level, to create a fantastic adventure that is played both in 2D and 3D in an alien world full of mystery that will keep you gripped from the beginning to the very end. Anodyne 2 takes place in New the Land, a strange and alien world where the equally as bizarre population are slowly but surely succumbing to dust, a substance that infects people, causing them to change in an assortment of different ways depending on the individual's personality. Some become ill, some become filled with anger, and some become lost to their desires. But no matter how it affects them, the dust will always eventually lead to their death. You take on the role of Nova the Nano Cleaner. It is Nova's role to travel the world of New the Land, find those infected with the dust, and shrink into nano size, entering their bodies and ridding them of their ailments. Then return the collected dust and placing it into the dust prism in the centre. The centre is the place of all creation. But is what is seeming like a mission of good ever so straightforward? My detailing of the plot may be a bit skimpier than usual with Anodyne 2, but to say much more than that will be going into spoiler territory, and I certainly don't want to ruin the experience for anyone, so I'll leave it at that in that regard. The plot to Anodyne 2 is fantastic. It is extremely well paced and very well written, with twists and turns throughout that make you question what is right and wrong, all the while keeping you gripped from start to finish. Unlike its predecessor, Anodyne 2 is a much more grounded story. The first game had a very subtle plot to it that wasn't very clear, leaving it to the player's own interpretation as to what is actually happening. Anodyne 2 on the other hand presents its plot more clearly, making it easy to understand and follow, but that doesn't mean the charm of the original isn't there. Anodyne 2 still has those subtle and meaningful messages of general life within its quirky and whimsical plot and characters, just like the original did. It is something I was delighted to see a return to the sequel, as in many ways it is what made the characters and the plot of the original game so special and unique. You just never know what you're going to experience and find next. And that is what is so gripping with the overall plot of Anodyne 2 also. No matter whether you're 1 hour into the game or 4, there is always something new, interesting and surprising to encounter. There is no predictability in any shape or form. It is a truly gripping tale from start to finish. In Anodyne 2, the ultimate objective of Nova's quest is to find all the magical cards to upgrade the dust prism, and then fill it with dust collected from those infected. To do this, you must find those infected with dust and enter their bodies to cleanse them using the dust vacuum. Doing this allows Nova to collect the dust along with magical cards. These are required to upgrade the dust prism in the centre of the main town Cenote. It is required to upgrade the prism in order to gain access to new areas throughout the world. Gameplay consists of 2 separate elements. The first is the 3D exploration, where you move around the world of New the Land from place to place and talk to characters, all the while having a very light element of 3D platforming. The second is the 2D perspective, where you play in an old school Zelda-like style, where you solve puzzles, collect dust and find enemies. Let's start with the 3D exploration. The 3D part of the game is solely for moving around, doing small amounts of platforming, finding secrets and interacting with the various characters of the game. You control Nova using the arrow keys. Up and down moves her forward and backwards, and left to right move the camera to the sides. You can also use the Q and E keys to move the camera when you need to view from a different point, like down facing up or to the sides. Nova can jump and do a double jump in mid-air, and can also glide by holding down the jump button, allowing her to descend at a slower rate, allowing access to areas that would otherwise not be possible to reach. Though for those worried about platforming, such gliding moments are only on occasion and very easy to pull off. While exploring using the tab key, Nova can turn into a car, allowing for faster and easier movement through the world. This becomes extremely useful the further in the game you progress, as you travel from area to area. As the further you go, the more distance there is between you and the city of Cenote, as it is located in the very heart of the map. The general moving around and the camera movement of the game are both very well done. Nova, both in her personal form and vehicle form, is easy to control, all the while the camera being very functional and never getting in the way. The only point where I did have a bit of trouble with the camera is when attempting to get it in a very specific position, such as looking over a very steep cliff, generally in my hunt for metacoins. Metacoins being an optional collectible in the game that I will discuss in more detail shortly. Other than that, however, the movement is fluent and the camera is very well done, where it never hinders you where it is needed most, which was always an issue of the times with 3D platformers of the past. So to see such an issue now gone is a fantastic delight. As for the 3D platforming side of things, it is only on occasional moments would you need to deal with this. Most of the 3D platforming revolves around finding the secrets where they are hidden in a more difficult to reach place, as opposed to being in plain sight or getting your hands on the previously mentioned metacoins. This usually entails platforming your way to a high ledge or getting yourself on top of a building or something along those lines, but there is nothing difficult about reaching such areas. There are moments throughout the game where a little amount of platforming will need to be done to reach one of the characters required to progress in the game, but it is never a puzzle or difficult area to reach. So no matter whether it is finding secrets or needing to get to a critical character, those who aren't too fond of 3D platforming won't have their progression hindered by it, which is a fantastic decision by the developer, as it means everyone can enjoy it and not have to worry about disliked elements getting in the way. Each area within the 3D world has its own very distinct layout, environment and cast of characters to meet and interact with. Cenote is a circular city, with the mainlands being above it while the centre is below it, both of which are accessible through a central lift. The population consisting of bird-like creatures, worms, creatures with rocks for heads and other such bizarre individuals. As an example of a few other areas within the game, there is an underground dome with tree sculptors, a sunny seaside area and even a grassland with talking trees. But I dare not go into much further details on the areas than that, for it will start to spoil things. Each area within the game is big and superbly different from any of the others, and always has something entirely different to experience, with some being absolutely breathtaking with its visuals. Not to mention each area having its own little story to tell, which only further increases how different and interesting each is. Much like the plot itself, each of the areas within the game has something new and completely different to show, never ceases to amaze you, no matter how long you've been playing. And between the many interests, the easy to navigate design and the variation, each area is an absolute joy to play and explore. As for the secrets in the game, they are extremely well designed. Each area will contain at least one secret, a secret being an egg hidden within the map, with them containing either a card or an upgrade to your health bar. Now, the idea of having to find secrets to find the progress important cards may seem like a drag, but there is a great little mechanic that helps you with this. As you progress in the game, the card locator becomes available. What this does is highlight on the map if there are any cards or health upgrades that remain to be found. Cards are shown by the letter C in a rectangle, the health upgrades with a heart icon. This mechanic won't give you the exact location of these secrets, but it does tell you if there are any in the map you are in, resulting in you never wasting your time attempting to find a secret in an area that doesn't have any left. The secrets themselves are easy enough to find. The maps aren't so big and difficult to traverse that you will spend ages looking for them. Very often they're in a spot where you can see them, or a pathway of some kind that makes it pretty obvious that you're onto something. So despite some of the secrets being needed to progress, they aren't so hidden or out of the way that it slows down the pace and progression of the game, and are certainly very enjoyable to seek out. Final thing to discuss in relation to the 3D side of things with Anodyne 2 is the previously mentioned metacoins. Once you reach a certain point in the game, around about the stage of 1/3 to half completion, the meta shop will become available to you and metacoins will spawn across all the maps. The meta shop is where you get the previously mentioned card locator, but its primary purpose is to give access to behind the scenes content, such as message logs and access to prototype versions of the levels in the game, along with information behind the design and creation of those levels. Each item in the shop requires a specific amount of collected coins in order to purchase and unlock. At first only a small amount of items will be available, but the further you progress, the more that will become available to you. The card locator is really the only game changing item in the meta shop, while the rest is all completely optional stuff. Nevertheless, the ability to unlock such content and to see the process behind the creation of the level is always an interesting and fantastic optional task within the game. The metacoins themselves are large and easy to see, with most of them being located in very accessible areas. It isn't necessary to collect every single one of them to unlock all the items in the shop either, so there isn't any pressure when you're having difficulty getting some of the harder to reach coins. It isn't a mechanic that will interest everyone, but nevertheless it is a great little addition to the game that not only rewards the player with behind the scenes content, but gives an extra task for the player to complete, adding to the playtime. As a whole, the 3D segments of the game are brilliantly designed. The controls are very responsive, the camera works very well for the most part. The areas and the cast of characters are fun, varied and interesting, with secrets being enjoyable to find, yet not overly difficult or complicated complex at the same time. The transition of a game from full 2D to 3D is always a very worrying design choice, as the history of such transition hasn't been a good one. But with Anodyne 2, the 3D aspect of the game is solely to do with exploration, while the combat is left to the 2D side of things, which was a fantastic idea for such a small developer. It keeps things simple from a development standpoint, all the while allowing the developer to let their imaginations go wild with the world and character design. And that is exactly what the developer has done, creating a 3D world that is full of bizarre alien lands and characters in a way that would never be possible with 2D, all the while not risking too much with changing what everyone already loved about the original. And what we get is an experience like nothing else we've ever had before, and that is a joy from start to finish. The 2D segments of the game take place when Nova sparks a connection with either someone or something in the world, shrinking herself to nanosize. When dealing with someone infected with dust, the player will first need to get close enough to the person before being able to shrink down. This is done in a separate segment of the game where different coloured dust particles are shot from the infected person to strike Nova. The objective here is to block these projectiles as you get closer with a shield barrier. In order to do this, the player needs to make the barrier the same colour as the projectiles, or in the case of black projectiles, not to have the shield up at all. The colour of the barrier is changed depending on what arrow key you press and hold down. Each time you block a projectile, you will get closer and closer to the infected person, but each time you're hit, you will get pushed back a bit. Get pushed back too much, you will need to start over. Once you get close enough to the infected person, Nova will shrink and enter their body where the 2D segment will begin. One of my very few criticisms that I had with the preview build of the game is that when you first enter this segment, there's no introduction to it and you need to figure out the workings of it on your own through trial and error. Thankfully that is no longer the case, as now the first time you enter this segment a very brief but well illustrated tutorial is given, so you know exactly how it works from the get-go. These segments may seem like a needless addition to the game, but the truth is they actually really add to it. They add a sense of challenge, though nothing too drastic, all the while showcasing that dust isn't just this idle thing that infects people. It is aware of Nova's presence and will do everything it can to stop her, even before she can get herself into a position to do any real damage. The idea behind the creation of these moments is actually quite clever, and that is to show just how dangerous dust is and its capabilities, along with giving a sense of constant struggle on the protagonist at the same time. Nothing that Nova experiences or does are easy or straightforward. Every step of her journey is hardship, and that is what these moments symbolise, and they're quite magical because of that. Once you've shrunk down and are inside the body of someone infected, the 2D side of the gameplay will begin. Anyone who has played the original Anodyne will be familiar with how it works. Essentially you move around the map in a Zelda-like fashion, where the entire map consists of a large number of rooms that are interconnected. Throughout these segments you will have to face off against a variety of different enemies and solve various puzzles, with the puzzles and enemies getting more complex and difficult the further in the game you progress. During these segments you can use the vacuum to suck up dust, along with being able to use it to suck up enemies and blocks, then shooting them at other enemies to kill them. Enemies comprise of many of those from the previous games, such as standard slimes, fire slimes, ice slimes and the spiky, with each enemy type having its own attack pattern. Very often enemies are required to solve puzzles. For example, an ice slime may be used to freeze a fire enemy, or you may have to vacuum a spiky to a specific position or something along those lines. In other cases you will need to find keys to unlock the path to the next area. At the end of each of the levels, at least at the beginning of the game, you will have to face off against the Dust Assassin, which is a sort of boss enemy before being able to reach the Dust Crystal that you need to vacuum to receive the magical card needed for upgrading the prism. These encounters revolve around sucking up blocks or other enemies and firing them at the boss. After a few hits the boss will die, often spouting things like Nova must die and the likes. These boss fights are great and really put everything you've learned to the test and can be quite intense. The issue I have is that for some reason these assassins disappear after you cure the first few characters in the game, but there are a few other encounters in the game that you could consider a boss thereafter. I can't think of a reason for such boss enemies' sudden disappearance, and the one issue it brings is the lack of challenge because of it. The 2D segments of the game are more puzzle based than challenging combat, and having those bosses were about the only difficulty the game gave. So with the boss enemies absent for most of the game, the general combat is a bit too easy. So much so, in fact, I didn't die once. It isn't a deal breaker, as the puzzles at times make up the challenge for what is missing with the combat, but those who were looking for the same combat challenge of the original game will be disappointed in that regard. A big difference between the 2D gameplay of the original game and Anodyne 2 is that players will notice is the platforming is now gone. Anodyne 1 had quite a bit of platforming with jumping around, which sometimes got very arduous, but that is not the case in Anodyne 2. Instead, any platforming is left to the 3D element of the gameplay. This results in a much more fluent 2D gameplay than the first game, and makes the puzzles much more focused on brain power over reflexes, making it much more friendly to a wider audience than its predecessor. And while the original game is excellent, the general pacing and flow of the 2D gameplay of Anodyne 2 are much better and faster, because of this design choice. Each of the locations in these 2D segments changes in accordance with the character that you're attempting to clean. The entire environment is a depiction of what they are, where they're located, their personality, and how the dust is changing them. For example, one of those infected are filled with anger and are located at a construction site. So when in 2D, the environment is very like that of the construction site, but it is filled with fire and fire enemies to fit in with their anger. Another example is a creature that enjoys licking things, and because of the dust, their desire to lick and taste things has consumed them. In the 2D stage of this character, the environment looks like it belongs to a tongue, and even some of the obstacles you need to overcome are actual tongues, along with the little characters representing taste buds. Each of these 2D stages is completely unique and absolutely fitting with the character whose body you're in, from their physical representation to their personality to how the dust is affecting them. It is an absolutely brilliant design that keeps those 2D parts of the game exciting, refreshing, and an absolute joy to keep experiencing. There are two areas within the game, however, that do go to the extreme in wackiness, and will make you wonder why they were even made, as they are completely out of tone to that of the rest of the game. I had difficulty in figuring out the developer's thought process when making them and the purpose behind it. Despite their tonal strangeness and the questionable fitting in the world, they do exactly what all the others do, and that is tell a story, and overall are still enjoyable to figure out and play through. As a whole, the 2D element of the game is brilliantly designed. Just like with the 3D side of the game, the 2D environments and locations are fantastically detailed, varied, and refreshing throughout. The combat may have been toned down in difficulty considerably to that of the original, but the puzzles and general flow of the game are much more fluent and less frustrating in return. The sacrifice of the general combat difficulty is one that is worth it in the long run, as it makes the game far more enjoyable for those that are not hardcore 2D Zelda-like veterans, and while the lack of difficulty may not please the veterans, the fluent design certainly makes up for it. As a whole, the gameplay to Anodyne 2 Return to Dust is fantastic. The blending of the 3D exploration and 2D combat and puzzles work in complete harmony with one another, and it certainly proves that with a bit of clever design, the transition between 2D and 3D can work perfectly together in a single game without taking away from either one or the other. The gameplay is fun, it is fluent, it is varied, and everything within it has a purpose and meaning behind it. No matter how long you've been playing the game, it never feels like you're treading familiar ground, and there is always something new to experience. Of what problems the gameplay does have are only minor hiccups. They don't affect the overall experience in a major way, and even though going through such instances are necessary, they are short and far between. The lowering of the overall game difficulty may not be to everyone's pleasure, but in the long run, it allows Anodyne 2 to cater to a much wider audience than that of its predecessor, allowing for more to enjoy it, and that is always a good thing, both for gamers and for the developer. It's true that the gameplay to Anodyne 2 won't be to everyone's taste, but even if platforming and 2D puzzles are not your main interests, I'd suggest giving the game a go for its beauty, creativity, and the imagination that has gone into its design. The atmosphere to Anodyne 2 is one of the most fitting I've experienced all year. Throughout the entire game there is that sense of surrealism in the atmosphere, where it feels like you are in a dream or you're experiencing something that isn't real. It is that constant back and forth between distinguishing reality from fiction. This atmosphere fits in so perfect with the world of the game, because of its bizarre and alien-like design. It is a world full of the impossible, both from its characters and its architecture, and yet there it is in front of your eyes, this living and breathing world. It gives that sense where you feel like you are having this really weird dream that doesn't have any logic whatsoever, and yet at the same time a real sense of reality too. The atmosphere just intensifies everything that the game portrays, be it the surrealism, the emotion, or just a general sense of escaping to another world that is completely alien. And it is that which makes Anodyne 2 so special and so different from anything else out there. The atmosphere is what brings everything to life in Anodyne 2. Anodyne 2 Return to Dust is the toughest game I've had to cover so far this year. Not because the game has problems or has an awful lot to discuss what may be bad or good. Instead, the challenge with reviewing Anodyne 2 comes with expressing the experience and putting those expressions into words, all the while making sure not to spoil everything for the viewer at the same time. Anodyne 2 is a truly magical experience in practically every single way. It is the kind of game that just absorbs you into it to the point that you feel every emotion that runs through it. From that sense of surrealism, to the wonder of being awestruck by its beautiful alien world, to the sadness and at times anger and hate you feel towards characters, to the hardships of Nova's journey. You become Nova, and with that you become a part of the world. There are so many games out there that try so hard to play with your emotional strings, but so few ever succeed in doing that. But Anodyne 2 does more than just succeed. It succeeds in a way that goes far beyond that of anything I've experienced before. I've had games make me shed a tear or two in the past, and even had me whooping and cheering in glee, but never has a game filled me with such a multitude of different emotions throughout a single experience, and that is what makes Anodyne 2 such a standout game. All of this is then combined with a brilliantly designed gameplay that too is very different from anything else out there, giving you the elements of exploration, puzzle solving and combat, all the while experiencing what is essentially two very different worlds combined together into one, with its blend of 2D and 3D. It truly is a captivating and magical experience, and is easily one of the best video games ever made. And with that, I give Anodyne 2 Return to Dust a 10 out of 10. Anodyne 2 is a perfect example that video games can be much more than just moving a character around, performing specific actions, or shooting and blowing up things, or even just telling a story. It is proof that video games can be just as powerful as any other medium to make us feel emotion and experience feelings in ways that we never thought possible. It is proof that we really have only touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what video games are capable of, when the developer tools are put into the right hands. It is proof we still have much to discover in the capabilities of video games.